News, specifically evangelical and U.S. cultural news, than we are, as evidenced again by our jackets and ties. And if anyone gets annoyed at that, well, keep watching anyway.
Well, and
right?
They can try it out. Go get a jacket, put a tie on, see how much you like it. I mean, just throw it on over a t-shirt. I'm thinking you probably see what we're talking about.
I challenge those who watch this to actually pause it, get a jacket and tie, put it on, and watch this in a jacket and tie.
That's actually the best way to consume this content for sure. That's 100% true.
Absolutely. It always has been, but we finally found our way.
Yes.
I've always gotten that commentary. I had to address one thing. I'll have to look at the archives of Twitter or X. Someone mentioned that, one thing I have to ask you that doesn't have to do with our topic today is, can you give instruction on milking a cow? Someone said I should ask you about that. I guess, do you have some experience? Have you milked cows? How many cows?
I milk at least 3 cows every morning, sometimes in the evening. I do know. I'm looking at getting a PhD in milking cattle. And so there's 2 ways, and both involve sort of the first introductory step. You want to clean that teat very thoroughly. Got to really get that thing clean. Soapy water. Got to really make sure that thing's clean. If you do it the traditional way, you take your hand, you clamp off the teat, and you move downward, kind of gently, and compress with the other fingers, and the milk comes out. And it eventually will make your hands feel like they've been shredded. When I first started milking cows, I was just constantly like having hand cramps, because I just wasn't used to making that motion. The other thing you can do is get an electric milker. And the electric milker,
for those city boys. Those city boys use their electric milkers all the time with their cows.
I'm kind of offended by that as a non-city boy who uses an electric milker.
Oh, no.
No, I'm really not offended. Here's what it came down to for me. I could milk 1 cow in the time I could milk 3 or 4 and clean the milker. And so I actually used, probably people don't care enough, but I care about this. I'm going to explain. The milker I used was built in like 1940, and the Secretary of Agriculture at that time said it would be the ruination of America's milk industry. that there was something about hand milking that was essential. And boy, was he wrong.
Yeah, man, this will be the ruination. One thing that is underrated on this topic is really the advancements in cow milking that we've seen over the decades. It's a topic not often explored, and we might have to explore that a little bit more in future videos. I have a feeling those that watch this will be commenting pretty well on that.
I'd be happy to.
So you actually, you have cows?
If they want to drive out, I'll train you how to milk a cow. I've got a sweet cow named Peaches who's an ideal learner model. So y'all come out and you can help me milk.
I expected so much less with that question. You knocked that out of the park. I really didn't. So you actually have at least 1 cow.
I own, not all
Peaches,
cows are in milk currently. So, your lactation, this is not what I expect to be doing tonight, but your lactation cycle can be a year or more if you take care of your animals. So I've got a few that have worked their way out, but I have, I think, 6 milk cows right now, some calves, and then my family beef operation is bigger than that, but the milk operation is kind of smaller.
Okay, so where's the beef? We know where to find it.
Beef for sure.
Absolutely, and you know a fair bit about milking a cow, and that is utterly amazing. I had to.
What is the rim shot noise?
Yeah, you know how long I've been sitting on that? Come on.
Well, in the evenings, my cows sit on it too. Sit on their teats.
That's true. There we go. Yeah.
That's why I have to clean them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I learn more about you every time I talk to you. I'm legitimately stunned. You've earned backwoods belief, or at least, kind of that side of things, rural kind of belief that your podcast is about. So you've definitely earned the title.
I'll lean in.
Yeah. Well, for those that watch this is not about cows specifically. Again, future episodes, there'll probably be at least 3 more. that are more specifically about milking cows. But this is the news we're discussing about H1B, something that was spoken a lot about in the last few weeks. H1B, the visa program. I'm going to read a little bit about H1B for those that haven't heard much about it, and then I'll give some general thoughts and we'll get going. So here are some basics from Forbes magazine online about H1B. Give us a preface here. The H1B visa program is intended to allow U.S. companies to employ foreign workers in specialized occupations, and it has become a flashpoint in the ongoing debate over American jobs and immigration, as the tech industry continues to face layoffs and economic uncertainty. Tensions are rising between American workers and H-1B visa holders, with the latter group often viewed as direct competition for coveted positions. This controversy intensified recently on X or Twitter, creating a rift, allegedly, between anti-immigrant loyalists of Donald Trump and the tech-oriented conservative faction. And here's a little stat line that I thought was interesting. The H-1B program has a significant impact on the demographic makeup of the U.S. workforce, particularly in the tech and engineering sectors. Notably, 72% of H-1B visa recipients hailed from India, while another 12% came from China in 2023. So that's getting up to like 84%, but a massive amount allegedly here, 72% from India.
Right.
And I mean, that's some expert research and development, by the way, if I may say. Earned this.
We expect this from a man dressed like that.
Absolutely. I'll give a thought before we jump in, sort of, if we're getting to a biblical category before we discuss, is this good, is this bad, or is there nuance? Big picture theologically, you can let me know what you think about this, Jeff. Here is what I believe we should say in general about foreigners or sojourners in a land. Based on what I believe is biblical data, we should care for them, knowing that once someone enters a new land where they don't know the customs / don't have connections, etc., they are prone to be taken advantage of. They don't have the connections. That said, caring for the sojourner cannot violate other biblical principles. God's word does not contradict itself, such as the establishment of borders, as well as a civil authority being a deacon or servant of God in the nation in which God has sovereignly placed that government. In other words, if an influx of foreign people jeopardized a government's ability to perform its primary function, that is punishing evil, rewarding good, and maintaining good order, then the quote-unquote caring for the sojourner in that case is really a worthless label. It is in fact hating the sojourner and the citizen by virtue of not respecting and following God's law. You cannot disobey God's word under the guise of compassion. Generally, hopefully that was a balanced approach, but wanted to get your thought. Is that a good, in your estimation, kind of theological foundation to be working from as a Christian regarding nations, sojourners, government, and the like?
Absolutely. Clearly, there's an obligation in Scripture to care for the people you're in proximity to. And the Lord has an eye on those who are in difficult circumstances, right? And He expects His people to be merciful to those in difficult circumstances in a way that looks like His own mercy towards those in difficult circumstances. I thought that was a really excellent summary. The thing that I would kind of pull out from it and expand is when you think about texts like, I guess the first one that comes to mind is the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a proximity issue. Who's a good neighbor? It's the person who sees the person in need and cares for them. And that is right and good. It's holy. It models the character of Christ. But that kind of endeavor is not intrinsically the same thing as giving the person you encounter what they want in all circumstances according to their own preferences. So, the Good Samaritan tends to wounds, provides shelter, provides food, right? what some of the evangelical elites who I think are running a rhetorical game have tried to take that and turn it into, well, basically we should do for these people whatever it is they desire. So if they want to stay in the country beyond their visa limitations, or if they want to come into the country illegally, if they have a desire for a better life, how could we deny them that? So the one is valid. Care for the person in need you run into. But you can authentically also, and should faithfully, be someone who acts in the interests of your other neighbors and say, we have, as you said, borders, immigration policies, just general commitments to be law-abiding that are also at play here. Mm-hmm. And so in theory, you could find someone in distressing circumstances, get them cleaned up, healthy, make sure they had a good place to stay, and at the same time be working to get them removed from the country long term because they're here illegally. Mm-hmm. Those are both righteous Christian actions, and they can be pursued without any kind of contradiction. And, to the person who thinks that's grating, well, what kind of love do I want to show to my neighbor? We know God forbids the breaking of just laws, and population laws that concern population are just laws, generally speaking. And so I want to love him to make sure he's got enough food to survive the night or thrive, while he's here. But I also want him to not be afforded the opportunity to easily flaunt God's standards. And so it's loving your neighbor to do both. Help him out tonight. Help him get out of here tomorrow because that's in his best interest as well. Yeah.
That's a good point. You can't really be loving someone if you just say, hey, go sin. Or, hey, sinning's okay. Or in this case, not necessarily that, I guess, exactly the H1B thing right now, but, if you're talking about someone who's doing something illegal, you can't really tell them. In general, it's okay to, disobey a government's laws and commands. It's okay. I love you.
Yeah, we still have a sense of that, I think, even in sort of what Joe Rigney would call unchecked sin of empathy, that if you truly love someone who's deeply addicted to heroin, their chief desire is to get another shot of heroin.
Sure. Yeah, they can't really suppress that.
It's not loving.
It's going to come out.
To get them another shot of heroin and enable the kind of lifestyle that will destroy them. And you're right that like the H1B visa is a legal program. The controversy, I guess I'm assuming too much familiarity. The controversy is the program abused in a way that ultimately is a end run around their immigration laws? And so I'm kind of jumping ahead to that. But yeah, the H1B program in and of itself can be faithfully obeyed in a way that doesn't necessarily make you say, no, that person's got to get out of the country.
Yeah. I mean, with the H1B, we can certainly transition into that, though. So you mentioned, is it a sort of a way about or a way around our immigration laws? Is that something you believe that, based on kind of what you've looked at? What do you kind of mean by that?
That's substantially it's substantially part of the pie chart of those who have objected to our current H1B situation, right? That you referenced on social media. That if you look into the program is supposed to be a way to, as a country, avail yourself of skilled workers in a temporary time frame in order to pursue what's best for your national needs. But one of the intrinsic features is that it comes with every visa comes with some sense of time frame, and so one of the complaints that you hear from those who object to our current state is people come in on an H1B visa, they don't honor the requirements, and they just stay in the country until something intervenes to make them roll out. And so, when you overstay your visa limitations, you become an illegal immigrant, right?
Sure. Yeah. Plus, it's dissatisfied the purpose of why you were originally contractually kind of here, which was to stay during this duration for this purpose under this type of visa. So there's definitely a taking advantage of the system. You may have no thoughts on this. Thought I would ask it. In terms of domestic workers, people that are U.S. citizens, in your view, is there a legitimate lack of skilled workers in tech and engineering?
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly don't know that. But if so, secondary question, is there a better solution long term for the welfare of a nation, the welfare of a people, all that, than H1B visa type program? So you may not know the answer to the first question.
I know that that's the claim by some new appointments to the Trump administration, that there aren't enough workers of sufficient quality in the U.S., so they have to make use of this program to supplement that. So I can't evaluate it, but I know that Vivek and some others have claimed that that's the case. Musk has seemed to indicate that he thinks that's the case. That's a credible narrative to me in that, one, government education has been consistently lowering the standards of educational achievement for basically my entire adult life. You can find these studies that American students almost always underperform their peers from other countries, but they also are more confident they're performing highly than their right. Yeah. So we've done this great job of being like, you feel good about you, man, and it doesn't matter what you actually achieve. Then you add in that so many higher education institutions and even specifically engineering programs have displaced objective qualification for what we would call DEI standards, right? So the idea isn't how do we get the best candidate in and use that raw material to make them the best engineer they can be. It's how do we make the ethnic profile of our program more broad and varied. So it makes a lot of sense to me that that would leave us with a dearth of qualified candidates. And honestly, like the things you see about Boeing airplanes, for instance, starting to fall apart. Empirically, it looks like some of this is starting to really put people in danger, So I don't know well enough to evaluate it, but I'm open to the idea, and I can see factors that would certainly make me think it's likely we're in this situation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you would think, if you're thinking about the USA and our schooling program, public school as like a sports team, you'd think, okay, what are the inputs of a good sports team? Having a solid plan, knowing, your strengths and weaknesses of the different players, discipline, putting in the right amount of practice time and on the right actual things you need to practice on in order to be prepared on game day and like know what you're doing. And you're shown the result by how you perform like on the field, if we're talking football or whatever. And so there is a logical process of preparation meets the ability to perform and achieve. But your output really isn't going to be much different than what your inputs were. But to your kind of what you're saying, I would say I noticed similar things growing up. I'm probably a casualty to some degree of my lack of focus in academia and everything, as many people are. But yeah, the standard is kind of like you really have to go out of your way in some ways to fail. Not for everyone, but in general, I mean, it's not like it's the hardest thing in the world to make it through high school in the U.S. in most circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, my friends who are in government education noticed a shift when federal funding was tied to graduation rates. So, it's almost impossible for a student not to graduate high school. The system is compelled by its incentive, and the incentive is to get them out the door as a graduate with a diploma. And they're going to do whatever that takes, regardless of whether or not they've actually met the academic objective standards that would lead you to say they've earned that degree. It's a long-term catastrophe, but people who only think short-term because of financial incentives are happy to participate in it. I guess their hope is that maybe they won't be the ones who have to live with the consequences of it. They can get out before the backlash comes. I'm not entirely sure, but I know they want the money pipeline kept on, and it changes things.
Yeah. So let's just assume it is true that we have in the U.S. a lack of a skilled workforce or a trained workforce in these probably highly skilled areas, tech and engineering. Is there a better solution? What are some solutions that come to your mind as like a citizen of a nation? Nations are authorized by God. They are sovereign under God. We know that borders are biblical. The Lord has established their times and places we see in the New Testament. So, other solutions other than let's farm this out. Let's bring in those, and maybe there aren't some great solutions, but anything come to mind or anything you've thought about?
Really, it just dovetails with what we just got done talking about, and it tracks all the way back to the beginning of the episode. What nation should the United States of America hold as its primary interest? Well, it's the United States and the people who comprise it.
Sure.
And so returning to a merit-based and outcome-oriented approach to educating our children in order to help them capitalize on the potential they hold is long-term not just better, but it's essential. You're not, our representative government is not loving our closest neighbors by letting them fail forward to the point that they are incapable of being a contributing member of society. Assuming there's not some kind of prevailing handicap that prevents them. We obviously need to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. So
Sure.
The long-term approach is in part for the nation itself to say, raising the bar for our own people in a way that compels them upward. And honestly, in a way that harkens back to times when Americans were higher achievers. That's essential.
Yeah.
Long term, of course, as a church man, I'm going to say that preaching the gospel and discipling people always improves that person's life. It's always better to walk with Christ, right?
Yeah.
So you've got government programs, you've got church programs. The other thing that I would point to is I actually would say the H1B program is a reasonable program for a country to have in its arsenal to capitalize on its own best interests. So do you follow Wrath of Non on X? Are you familiar with that?
Sounds familiar, but
it's
no.
Wrath of GNON, and it's one of my favorite follows. Whoever is behind that is either mega brain in a way that I just don't have categories for, or it's a collection of people.
Yeah.
And I first came across the account in my interest in like architecture and human scale, living environments, things like that. So he would talk about human architecture rather than inhuman architecture, like brutalism as an inhuman architecture, and how does architecture raise the human. But he had a fascinating thread on Japan, where Japanese engineering is seen as incredibly excellent, right? I mean, people love Toyota cars, people love Honda cars, right?
True.
So we look to Japan as sort of an exemplar in engineering. What he claims, which I can't vet, but which he claimed in the thread, and what sounded very compelling to me, is that at a point in their, not too distant past, they recognized they had a dearth of the kind of skills they needed to have the kind of engineering ecosystem they needed for the best interest of their country. And so they imported one generation of experts from various different countries, self-consciously doing so to say, these people will help us relearn the skills. These people will help us relearn the mastery that we're lacking and help us hand it on to the next generation. And so his claim is for one generation, they did that. And then after that generational period was completed, they stopped because they had been intentional to make sure that they had made good use of that opportunity and handed it on. something like
Yeah.
that is very appropriate, very wise. It serves the interests of the nation. It serves the interests of the coming future of the nation, and it also serves the interests of whoever it is who's willing to say, I think it is worth whatever incentives they're offering me to pick up my family, myself from the place I'm from, come to Japan, participate in this program. The people who made that decision obviously saw it as better than their other alternatives. So I'm happy with the program if the program is implemented and conducted wisely. The question is whether or not that's the case. And if it's not, how do we get back to it?
Yeah. And we're getting back to that first category too with that. What is the purpose of a nation and a government, and who should a government be about protecting first? So, if you are using like an H1B visa program, for example, there has to be at least some way of thinking through, okay, how does this help short-term, long-term, our citizens? Does it have any back-end detrimental effects?
Right. And, you can do that while also thinking about the interests of those that you're calling upon as experts to help contribute to something you've identified a lack of, right? So being upfront with the person about the parameters of the program. Does this bump, if you come to America, love the lifestyle, the people, the culture, and want to integrate yourself into it, does faithful completion of your H1B time frame bump you to the top of the list of people who are coming in for long-term immigration under immigration policies? Things like that are appropriate to think through and have a game plan for, and where you need to offer that to people as a long-term option, or let them know, look, this is a temporary thing completely. If you decide to attempt immigration, you're not getting any special favors. Just being forthright up front. This is the nature of the relationship. This is what it does long-term. Is loving to those who you call on to participate in something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, if someone comes over, let's say, and they're in an H1B program and they gain a lot of skills, they do a lot of good work, and maybe they end up returning to their country, whatever. If they do invest any infrastructure, time, manpower into helping a U.S. citizen, that is a tremendous thing. And so I want to respect that very highly, given kind of what we're talking about. One thing that is a sad thing, though, is the fact that something like that is necessary for any nation. It's going to be a reality because we are fallen, and we know that nations are going to go awry in various ways, and so it's unavoidable, at least to some degree. But it does make me think, just from our own perspective as Americans, what got us here to the point where we're even having this conversation. Some of it is those education standards you've been talking about. A lot of it is just the deeper reality of, because there is a growing, palpable godlessness and a palpable paganism, and therefore an addiction to our own pleasures, sexual thrills, and this and that, we have, because of that, a fruit of that, we have foregone sort of higher things for the easy, the shiny, the whatever. Even like on a lesser scale, I don't know how many kids growing up, apart from very careful parenting, were convinced that, like, hey, sports are great, but it is just as valid, it's just as attractive to build that bridge over there that your dad helped build. See what I'm saying? Like, we've been trained by, here's what is good, here's what's shiny, here's what I want. And then it's these things that usually are either A, not good for us, or B, just not wise to statistically to be all about. And we've been sold this sort of shiny object that no wonder we don't have a lot of engineers or this or that. It's because, like, we all want to be like star quarterbacks or something. Yeah. Any thoughts there? Was that the way you grew up? Like, was that a cultural kind of thing that you remember?
Yeah. So I love sports. There's been political dynamics that have come into the sporting world that has kind of distanced me from the particular leagues that I grew up always interested in. But
Sure.
basketball was my kind of chief leisure interest when I was growing up. And
Yeah.
I have a son who is exactly the same way. And I'm trying to encourage those things because
Which is not bad, by the
it's
way.
a good thing.
Sports teach a lot.
And so I want to encourage him in that. But another conversation that I'm having with him as I'm trying to help him be the best player he can be is I didn't realize when the last time I was going to play a meaningful basketball game was happening. And I'm past that point now. And I spent countless hours in basketball camps, team activities, things like that. If I had done something comparable with a musical instrument, I could still be reaping the returns on becoming a skillful musician and enjoying the goodness of those invested hours in a way I can't really with basketball other than teaching my son what I know, which is a fine endeavor.
Sure.
So yeah, I think the way you're framing that is sports is a distraction from important things rather than training us for important things or more important things in our culture.
Yeah.
And really it gets dark when you think that there's some kids out there who aren't even giving their hours to being the best quarterback they can be. They're giving their hours to being the best digital quarterback they can be, right?
Sure, yeah.
Think about what a false sense of accomplishment that is, but the hours aren't available to regain. And, I mean, I've got a PlayStation 5. I played college football on the PlayStation with my son this holiday break. I don't hate those.
You got to teach him his boss. You got to teach him
exactly right. Although he's put in enough time now, someday soon, it may be coming. That's when you pull the power cord.
Yeah. Is that right? You learn the cheat codes. That's what you do.
So I guess I'm just trying to say I'm not really an extremist in that I've said these things have no place in my life. Maybe I should be more extreme.
Yeah.
But you do want to be conscious and helping those under your care conscious of like this. There's not a real high rate of return on investment here, man. And as a result, you can't just invest a ton of a very finite resource, which is the hours of your life, in something that is clearly not going to return any meaningful reward. You've got to be a steward. Yeah. You are a steward of what the Lord made you and gave you. So you better be thinking about that very carefully.
Yeah, and I mean, with we may have rabbit trailed, whatever, but like with the sports conversation, it's not just a distraction, but even like a sport that a kid is in for years and years, there's a great opportunity for a parent to help guide that child in thinking through and embodying, here is where this fits in God's overall economy. Here are the lessons that actually this can teach you. Here's where you actually could go with this sport if you reach the highest level. But there's some lessons we need to learn along the way. And here are some lessons we could talk about in probability and, being wise with your time and all these sorts of things. So I think part of it, comes down to, again, just a biblical worldview, a sound worldview of knowing how God has designed the world too. I wish I had, I don't know. I wish I just had more of a mind for that growing up myself, because I probably would have thought through some things more. But hey, live and learn. So
right, all you can do is try to help people see where the potholes were that you ran into, right, and say, well, let's steer around that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you had a sick crossover. Is that right?
I wasn't bad. I mean, it depends on what size barns you're talking about. I was all right at a certain level, but I'm also a hawk, and so with basketball, there's this. Eventually I realized I wasn't going to get taller. My growth rate had stopped, and that's a pretty jarring thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Once you realize your max height is going to be, 5-6 inches below the shortest NBA player or whatever, it's I don't know about this.
Right?
Probably not.
Exactly.
When Steph Curry dwarfs you, you're at a tough place.
Right.
So I had this question that came to my mind about H1B visas that I thought would be interesting because I don't know if a lot of people would have thought it from this perspective. If you were a Christian living in another land, should a Christian from another land, obviously the answer is kind of yes, but should he or she consider the moral implications of using this system for their own employment in America? And I'm assuming the answer is yes in the question, but I don't think a lot of people will have thought of it from that perspective. If you are someone who is taking advantage of a system like this, not in a bad way, I don't say that in a bad way, but if you're utilizing this kind of a program, is it worth thinking through the moral implications, just the consequences of what you're going to be bringing to the table, what you might be costing, what you might be benefiting? Any thoughts there?
Now, that's a really good question, and I'm with you in that I expect that most people haven't thought about it from that angle because I haven't.
Well, this is the news.
I think it's fair for an individual to say the government of another nation is offering this opportunity that I qualify for. Therefore, it is just for me to consider it a legitimate opportunity if I see that as the best use of my own resources that I'm called to steward, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't fault someone who doesn't do a ton of research to say, what do the people in that country think of this program? And am I going to displace someone? Because you just sort of default to the government's working in the best interests of its people. Although obviously that's not the case, but that's an easy assumption to make. So therefore I can just take that as an open invitation that's just and appropriate. I do think you would be wise to say, what would my neighbors think of me in that country once I enter it under these parameters, right? But it is in essence sort of this basic economic transaction that's really Christian. So I had a friend one time who was talking about the theology of owning a business, and he said, what I want to do is offer a product that my neighbor is so glad to receive and that they value so much more than their dollars that they are delighted to exchange their dollars for my product. And that really is how wealth is created. In that kind of transaction, both people come away believing themselves more wealthy than they were before the transaction.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's a version of that really does apply to these kind of scenarios. So I don't blame the person seeing the opportunity as credible. I do think
absolutely, yeah. Not a blanket sin category at all.
I think it'd be wise to think through what your experience will be on the ground if you take advantage of it. And I also think the burden is to say, am I being faithful to the terms I agreed to? Right? Am I going to operate within the legal parameters of the agreement? But also while I'm there, am I giving the best of myself to the endeavor that was the vehicle that invited me into the country? Right? Back to the honest day's work for an honest day's wage issue.
Yeah.
What about you? I mean, you came up with a brilliant question. How have you thought through that?
I only ask questions, never have answers. That's the news. No, well, the answer in some ways is in the question, obviously. Should someone who's a foreigner go into any nation, if there's a government program or some sort of opportunity, should they consider, if they're a Christian especially, the moral implications of going to another land on a contract or something and working? The answer is obviously yes. And I think, if you are someone if you're a Christian coming to the U.S. in an H1B situation, I think some of the things that you raised would be the valid questions. The big one specifically being, you mentioned it, how would this negatively or positively affect the citizens in this nation in which they have been placed by God, and in which there is a valid biblical category for their government being responsible to them first? And I don't want to mess with God's design there. And so, like you said, and I agree with, it's not a sinful category at all. But I think it would be worth someone thinking creatively, thinking about, if I'm doing this, how do I ensure that I can be as helpful and weirdly hospitable to the people in which I'm going to, and usually only a Christian who's been changed by the Spirit is going to have that mindset at all. Only Christians are going to want to be truly and long-term hospitable to those coming in, and only a Christian who's going to another nation for sure is going to have that mentality in large part. I don't think a lot of people are going to another nation and thinking, how can I help that people? A lot of times, it's a lot of, how can I help my economic situation? And obviously there's some to that that's not evil. I mean, the Lord has put businesses and markets and economies for the benefit of each party economically. It's knit into the fabric of the world that we live in. You mentioned it, a good is for a certain amount of dollars, and hopefully both parties leave thinking that they're, better for it. But that would be the main question. I think the main mindset for me would be thinking through creatively, how can I go and get the work done that I need to and benefit in the ways that I need to for taking this massive endeavor, while also thinking through what's the minimum amount of casualty I can cause to a native, like, people who live there and whose lives are there, and that's their nation, and how can I actually be leaving this place well, better than I found it, perhaps,
Yeah, I mean, man, that's some really profound stuff there, in the sense that I've never really thought of reverse hospitality. How am I seeking the interests of those that I'm the sojourner among? And I should, when you say it, I'm like, oh, of course. But I honestly never thought of that before. And so I really appreciate just the concept. And I hope, if your viewers haven't either, I think you've served us well just by putting that framing in front of us. So much appreciated. That I'm going to chew on that quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I guess having a little bit of foreign mission experience, part of that plays in, where being very sensitive to the area that you are in order to learn the culture and in order to better love the people. There were times where probably it was too much of an overcorrection, to be honest, where it's like, it feels like we are bending over backwards just to not offend people, rather than just being clear. And it depends on context and different religious landscape and everything. So I don't want to get into that, but there was a little bit of times where it's that's not just different. It's objectively wrong. We can say that.
Yeah, and foreign missions, I'm not sure that this is necessarily the prevailing motif, but it inherently carries a kind of confrontation with the host culture
100%.
in a way that a temporary specialist who's been,
not as much
as an asset doesn't. But I still think the idea that I have an obligation to those people that I want to be faithful in is really helpful, and I hope those participating are thinking through that.
Yeah. Arguing the difference between like two sizes of bolts or something, if you're in like a mechanic overseas, is different than confronting another religion with the truth of the gospel. So, definitely a massive, difference there. And so you're not going to have quite the confrontation, if you're in like a specialized field or whatever. So, but with the H1B visa program, obviously a lot of, I think, the arguments that probably went on online are about probably instincts and overall basic posture, rather than knowing the ins and outs of the program, or even knowing the statistics of what our labor force is. I truly believe that, and I don't even fault people for that in many ways. It's a lot of time, it's a posture of, okay, 50 years has taught me that our government on a federal level specifically does not care about its citizens. How do I know? Everything they put in place morally, everything they champion morally, not to mention fiscally, is constantly spend, never save, taxes are up, we pay for what they do, which is put a burden on their citizens in many ways. So I can understand just the basic knee-jerk reaction even to H1B, because for years and years, with illegal immigration being proof positive, there simply is no care about the nation that they govern. If there were, they would enforce what is known as a border.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, you're to the core of the controversy. We have...
Yeah, it's instinct and basic posture.
And even beyond instinct, as you said, we have this informed empirical set of data that they are not working in the best interest of their own people. This is a specific instantiation of the idea that you're pursuing the good of another people at your people's expense, and we're kind of sick of that everywhere we find it. Right. Yeah.
And so even if in this case some of that is actually wrong, I understand where it's coming from. Yeah, basically, because like you said, the data and the evidence is like, well, for decades and decades, all you do is you send our people over to foreign wars that we don't really understand. You spend a bunch of money we don't understand. You let people in illegally and do nothing about it. And our lives just get worse for no reason, even though we're voting you in to make those basic changes. You know, you can tell I'm a little cynical, I guess.
Well, I mean, how can you not be? Right. It's short-term cynical, long-term optimistic, because Jesus is king and he will have a visible kingdom at some point. But yeah, we're not currently living in circumstances that are palatable.
Yeah.
I don't blame people for knowing that.
Yeah. Sure. Well, brother, I don't know if I have too much more with H1B. I did want to ask, A, if you have been vaccinated, B, if you've been tested, H1B.
No, I'm woefully behind on my H1B vaccinations.
Okay. I've had 3 vaccinations, 12 boosts. No one is getting me with that H1B.
H1 boosted. That's great. No
one's getting me with that H1B.
Yeah. Maybe I need to get some H1Bs into milk cattle for me. Right. The criteria, I was looking at the program, the criteria is to have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in the field you're supposed to be working in or comparable experience. And so maybe I need to get some in to raise my milk game.
If I see something online or whatever, you message me or something, it's like, hey, got a guy coming over from India. He's going to be working with us, man. Our milk and beef output is going through the roof.
So this is where I'm the ugly American.
I know where this came from.
I don't think Hindus from India eat beef, right?
That's true. That'd be a tough sell. You're right.
Processor and work that way. I'm not sure what they do with milk. I'm not sure if it violates the divine status of cattle to milk them. I don't know.
That would make for maybe a great film, though. I mean, I left my whole nation, country, culture, and became a shame to my family. But I wanted to become a cow milker in the U.S. This has been my dream for years.
The immigrant underdog rises to the top like cream, right?
Hollywood could not write a better story. Are you kidding me?
For you, Hollywood. Honestly, look, again, I fully admit that I'm woefully ignorant on this front. If anybody watching knows the Hindu relationship to cow milk, I'd love for you to leave it in the comments so I can read it and educate my ignorant self.
You heard it. What is the Hindu relation to cow milk? Is it an okay thing? Let Jeff know
exclusively
in the comments.
Goat milk, or I really am fascinated and want to know, and I'm not going to search. I'm going to intentionally rely on your wonderful viewers to educate me.
I see. Well, hopefully they won't let us down. I'll let you know if I get that answer, and I'll certainly post on Twitter some of the stuff to whoever that guy was who commented all of your experience with cows and milking them and the various advancements in milking technology over the decades. Truly an inspiration.
I may not know much about the advancements because my equipment's from 1940.
Okay.
There are huge robot milker operations. I'm not into
I hear Tesla's coming out with something huge.
Cal X.
I mean,
X.
yeah.
I'm just not.
Space, cars, and then cows. That's what they do.
I'm not interested in robot milking operations. I think there is something human about caring for animals, and so I'm kind of stuck in the mud.
Yeah. Yeah. So you would almost be in agreement with that guy back in the 40s that this is the ruination of the milking industry as we know it. There's something human about milking.
Almost. I'd put it a little bit. I think it's the animal husbandry that's more important. But yeah, almost. I mean, almost. I don't think that reliance on technology in a way that disconnects us from the natural world is a long-term win for humanity.
Sure.
I'm agrarian at heart.
I'm an
agrarian at heart.
Backwoods belief. You turned a very interesting trail into a profound statement, and I do appreciate that.
I don't know how profound, but I can ramble. I can ramble with the best of them.
There we go. That is what you get on the news with Jeff Wright. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hopefully you learned a little something about H1B, cow milk, India, and whatever else we talked about. This one went everywhere. It was the best one we've done, I think.
I had a blast.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.